thank you guys so much for joining us. We are going to introduce ourselves first, so we will get started with our presentation, Enhancing Student Engagement with a Collaborative Culture. So here is a better picture of us maybe than what you can see on your screen. I'm Dr. Jennifer Engle, and I am the program coordinator in our department for educational leadership. So I help principal and superintendent candidates be certified in that area.
And I'm Kim Livengood, and I am the department chair of curriculum instruction. So I actually teach research, the cultural courses and the data collection courses across multiple programs. But all of our programs are completely online.
I'm Dr. Kristen Lyons, and I'm the program coordinator for, we have an MA in mental health and wellness counseling. And then I also help with, we have an online LPC bridge, can't call it a program, so the bridge. I help with getting students through all of that and getting them to where they have the coursework they need to move forward with becoming a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas, if that is their goal.
So as you can tell, we represent a wide variety of content areas as far as what we teach.
So one thing we want to do is, we know there's a potential for a lot of people in this, but we'd like to at least see, who are y'all? Where are you coming from? What's your role? Some of these images, I just could not help myself. So I live in a house of boys, all right? So I've been called bruh a lot here lately. So, but the first thing I know, so the one I saw where it's talking about, one should always meet new friends with a proper and cordial introduction. It's like, sup, what up? It just cracked me up. So, I want us to kind of just get an idea of who all is in this audience. So that way, if we do get the potential, we can maybe try to, apply. Yeah. It's, talk specific to your roles. So, yeah, where's the chat?
So if you'll just put in the chat what your role is, so we can kind of see.
Director, instructional designer, board member. You're doing great.
Then we have some more. Let's see. Professor. Associate faculty. So some faculty, as well as some of the leadership. So there's a variety. Online instructor.
I like that.
Yes.
Too. Mm-hmm.
Kids. Designer.
Okay. And faculty support.
Okay. Excellent.
So, and thank you for sharing, because we see the student engagement is something that it applies for all of us to be a part of. When anytime that you're with a class, it's like that applies for across those roles. There is some involvement, some interest across those roles.
Mm-hmm. The few points that we're going to try to focus on, of course, these are broad points that we'll get more specific as we go, but we want to make sure we kind of describe what those characteristics are of a collaborative community. How do we make that? What do we need to look for to say, okay, cool, I'm providing a collaborative community? Next, we want to look at how do we take interactive assignments? How do we develop them to encourage the student-to-student interaction that we're hoping for, and that most students, whether they know it or not, actually long for that interaction in an online course. And then from there, we want to discuss some of the lessons learned from some of the implementation of interactive assignments that we've done in our online environment. As Dr. Livengood said, for our perspective, all of our programs are online, and we deliver all different types of content. And so we want to talk through some of the lessons we've learned from the assignments that we have implemented to try to increase interaction between students. And me. So one of the biggest things is in online learning, as y'all know, is isolation, right? Typically that's something that a lot of students may be hesitant on when they choose to go into online, getting an online education. So the best thing is trying to figure out ways to not cancel that isolation, but assist in what that helping students experiences. So we want to be able to connect and be able to provide that. That's where that collaborative culture comes in. How can we create a collaborative culture? So some of that is making meaningful connections, building in those types of connections within assignments, within courses, even outside of courses, within programs. So making those connections and being mindful of those. Another thing is being intentional. That ties right into mindful of making sure what I'm doing has a purpose behind it. It's not just, woohoo, this might be fun, but being intentional behind the purpose and that drive of making those connections. Providing more than one opportunity. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes, you know, if you're in a course and you have one, it's like a one and done, but providing more opportunities for students to be able to interact together, which is going to build that collaborative culture within your course. Once again, that ties into being consistent. I feel like not only do you want that within a course, but you also want that across your program. So what if this course over here was super interactive and had tons, and then they get to this course and it is literally they're on their own, or they feel that way. So how to be consistent, not only in a course, but across programs and department.
So as you know, in our courses, to combat that isolation, we really focus on student engagement. In student engagement, as research has shown, it is when students are engaged in the course, they are making connections. They are in multiple ways. They are satisfied with the course, they're satisfied with the content, they're satisfied with the interactions. They are more motivated, they're more self-motivated to actually dig in, learn the content, study the content, finish the course. And they're able to focus their time on learning the content when they are truly engaged. And that's when they can do all of those things and they become more successful, more likely to be successful in the course. The challenge is, what is engagement? You know, because traditionally you think of engagement, especially in a face-to-face class, you think of engagement a lot of times it's they're answering the questions, they're raising their hands, they're volunteering to do something. And number one, we can't get that same kind of response. But number two, that doesn't always mean they're engaged in the learning process, according to research. So what does engagement look like? And so there are actually 4 types of engagement that research has shown that you can actually measure. And so that's kind of how what we look at. We kind of look at these, comparing these to our assignments. And when we get to the assignments, we'll kind of tie them back to it. But what we get at is that there's skill engagement at the skill level. And that's exactly what you probably think of. It's they're practicing. Whatever that skill is in the course, you are providing, they have an opportunity to practice it in some way. So that's one way of measuring engagement. The second way is emotional engagement. So emotional engagement I have to think about because it makes me think of the people, because I think of emotional attachments and things like that, but that's not what this is. Emotional engagement is more reflective. It is more their internal thinking about the content and giving them the opportunity or challenging them as part of the assignment to reflect on the content that they've learned and figure out how it applies beyond the assignment, in their role, in other areas, in another course. So that's that emotional engagement. Then you get to that participation / interaction engagement, and that is where they do have that connection with each other or with an instructor, where they're actually having conversation through discussion boards. They're having a conversation by asking questions. That's that kind of engagement. And then you have the performance engagement, which is kind of the levels, where that's where you might think of a rubric. Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing all the way to a satisfactory level 4, a meets criteria, or whatever those terms may be, or are they below those terms, or are they above? Are they exceeding the performance? But also along, one of the things that kind of influences engagement, according to research, is the students' learning goals. And what I mean by that is, are they learning this because they want to learn this content, going back to that emotional engagement, to be able to apply it? Or are they learning this to perform, to get that grade? And if they're learning it to apply it, then they're more likely to be engaged, they're more likely to be successful, they're more likely to remember it. But if they're learning just to get that grade, then they're less likely to continue. That's less engagement overall. So we kind of keep all of that in mind as we design courses and we develop assignments.
And that's a great example, that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, just like you said, because, and that's a perfect tie to the emotional and the performance, and a great way to look at that.
And so we consider the fact that we want to avoid isolation, and we consider the fact that we want to engage our students in how we're designing our courses. So we draw on the community of inquiry framework, and we purposely tie assignments and decisions on assignments and how they will play out with these three interactions or these three presences. So type of presence. So when in the cognitive presence, we really focus on that student to content interaction. And we try to see this through the enhancing curiosity for the content and how they approach it, and the ways that they explore the content, the ways that they will have to think critically in engaging with the content. And then we move into social presence, and we want to make sure, Kristen mentioned this a second ago, it made me think of it, even if they don't think they want the engagement, they perform better when they are engaged, and they perform better, even those individuals such as myself who say, I don't want to do group work. The social presence is a big piece of this, and having them have that student to student interaction after years and years of teaching on online classes, it enhances engagement just exponentially. And I'm not talking about the kind of group work where one of my teenage sons says, we did a group project in high school the other day, in our class the other day, and I got a 60 because 2 people in the group didn't do their work. And, you know, from experience, I know that that's a terrible situation. So we take those kinds of situations into account when we are trying to impact the social presence that they're having in the class and the engagement that they get from student to student interaction. So we try to make it meaningful, and we don't want to necessarily always have them construct and confirm meaning by themselves. We want them to do that with each other because there's such great learning opportunities from their peers. So we want them to communicate in these trusting environments and learn how to develop those interpersonal relationships. We all teach in the College of Education, so all of our candidates are in some way going to work in that field. And that's a very important aspect of their roles after completing our programs, that interpersonal relationship and building those. So we want to help them develop that in our classes, in the interactions with the content, by interacting with others in the courses. So we want them to feel comfortable and to project their own personalities and get to know each other and get to know the content on a deeper level because they had that interaction with each other. And then the teaching presence. This is one of the biggest barriers, I think, to online learning is students who feel like, I don't even know who my professor is. I don't even know anything about my instructor. I never see them. So we really try to include ways that you can have the student to instructor interaction. So that may come in lots of different ways, with the content, with the feedback, with just seeing me in a video in the middle of the week as I touch base with them. But making sure that they see me as a real person, recognize that my purpose for being here is to help provide a learning experience for you, and I'm very intentional in that. And so we really rely on this framework to help us reach that engagement goal. So the opportunities for engagement obviously are a little bit different with synchronous versus asynchronous classes. And I would say the majority of all of my classes, I would say the majority of the classes in our department are all asynchronous. So I think that just lends itself to isolation in general, but we try to help them in both situations. In courses that may have that synchronous aspect, there's ways, there's opportunities to use that COI framework to enhance that. So then I think I already touched on all of these, right? So just move on.
So there are different keys to engagement, and this is kind of where, as you start to, whether it be develop assignment, develop a course, develop a program, and all, you know, the funnel effect of all the pieces that you want to think as you go through of developing this. How do I engage them? Can y'all hear us?
I was muted. Yeah, you were talking and then it cut out for a second, but now you're back.
Okay.
Somehow we got muted. I don't know. They're like, we're done. You're done. But when it comes to engagement, you know, you want to make sure you kind of have these thoughts in the forefront as you do develop these different assignments and the different criteria. So the 4 pieces, and I'm going to talk through all of it, you know, sharing content, dialogue, more than instructions, and then to consider the rubrics. But let's be real. When it comes down to it, even let's say structure wise, I want to do a discussion board, that has to be engagement, totally done. We all know, we've all read discussion board posts. Some of those are not engaging even when you try to make them, right? They'll try to say something and you're like, okay, that was surface. And if we don't want surface, then we have to make sure we structure past the surface. I have to structure and be very specific in that structure of what I want them to say. How deep do I want them to go? And structure my questions to make them go to the level that I need them to go. So all that comes into, for one, yes, we want students sharing their content in these different perspectives. Because through that, when you share with somebody else, whether it be a peer review or whether it be a discussion board or whatever, you are gaining perspective from that other piece. So sharing the content is one way, right? Then dialogue. How can we put the dialogue to make them engage? Because discussion board is dialogue, but like I just said, doesn't mean we're engaging to the level that we're hoping for. Because that's just like common conversations between us and somebody else. It's like, hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Boom. That's it, right? There was nothing to that engagement. So being meaningful and purposeful. Another thing, that's just like I said, with the more than instructions, you're going to present your instructions for that assignment. But I have to be very mindful in the words and the task of how I put that to get out of them what I'm hoping, not only content wise, but how I'm wanting them to interact, whether it be with me, whether it be with another student, or whether it be with the content. Honestly, I think our goal is to always have all 3 of those in our assignments, because that is the key to community of inquiry engagement, right? But rubrics, I think, is another great piece of how to pay attention to the engagement level. Sometimes we have, I would say, almost like generic cookie cutter rubrics sometimes, but then the more specific we become in those rubrics, the more specific of what we, for each level of how do we get here, it gives students a better idea of what we expect from them and how we expect it. So considering our rubric builds and how that can also assist students in understanding and having the level of engagement that we would like to see in their courses.
So now we're going to get to the meat of it, in that the assignments. Because if you're like me, it's like, okay, this is all great, but what does that look like? And then, because a lot of times what I can do, and that's what we want you to do, is we're going to give you some specific assignments that we use, but then think about this, how else could you use them? Because that's usually what we do. It's like, okay, this piece works, but I'm not doing exactly that. So I'm going to start with this first one. I call it a video presentation responses. As I mentioned before, I teach the research data collection course. And this particular assignment is at the end of the data collection course. In that course, they've been developing tools, instruments, a plan for collecting data, a plan for analyzing data, and what they would do with the results, the type of results they would need, and the type of result, what those answers, what kind of decisions they would make. The thing is there's a lot of times they can write this out and they can develop this plan. But what we finally want them to do, and what I finally figured out when I was having these students, you know, having a lot of meetings with these students, Zoom sessions and things like that, as they were talking through it, is talking through it made a huge difference. So we take, once they have developed their plan on paper, now I want them to present it. And this is actually, they have come back and said, this is one of the most realistic assignments, because how many of them are going to write a research paper in an actual proposal? They're going to need to be able to present like almost an elevator pitch. They get a little bit more time than 25 seconds, but they have like 5 minutes to present the overall view of their research. And that's only part of it, because with that, so that's a presentation they post. It's a video, so they have recorded themselves, they post a video. I use a tool called Flipgrid or Flip, if you've ever heard of it. So then the students that have watched it, have viewed it, now they're going to go back and respond through video. But again, like she said, being purposeful about the assignment, they have to ask a question. They can't just post, oh, this was great. They literally have to ask a question that the person that posted the presentation has to go back and answer. So we are requiring this conversation as if they had gone into a school board and presented their plan, or they had gone into the principal or the site-based management team and presented their plan, and they're having to answer questions to say, this is why I would do this. This is why I chose this. This is why I would do the steps. And then after they have not only responded to those answers, but been asked the questions of others and seen those other presentations, they have to reflect and think, okay, they fill out a form of reflection. What is there anything I would change on mine because I've learned something from someone else? Or some of the questions that they've asked, I realize I need to do something different or add to this explanation or something like that. And so all of that sounds like and it is a lot, but yet it's very condensed in that it's videos back and forth. And it's asynchronous, but they're actually having this conversation of giving information, asking questions, answering questions, and reflecting on how that conversation went.
And then I wanted to share with you a jigsaw activity. So a lot of the content in some of our classes is challenging, and we teach in 8-week courses, so accelerated courses, and they have a lot of content to cover and digest, and then to complete an assignment to show their mastery of the objectives very quickly. So one of the things that we might do in some of our classes is to embed a jigsaw activity. And I do this specific one with research methods, which most of our students that take these courses, research is the furthest thing from their preference of what they would interact with in their program. And many people say, this has been my hardest class. I don't understand anything in there. I mean, we are really asking them to ingest a lot of information within a short amount of time. And it's not something that they would necessarily use in their future roles or in the rest of their programs. And so we want them to leave with this understanding, but we know that some of the content is really challenging. So in this particular assignment for the research course, and it's educational research, it's just an intro course, we have them break into groups, and each person in a group is going to dig in to do a deep dive into one of the methods, and then know that method backwards and forwards. And then they're going to share a presentation with their peers and in these small groups. So I think we do 5 of them in this particular module. So there's 5 different methods that they are going to get to know very well, because the person who does the presentation becomes an expert. And then they say, I know all about this. You can ask me anything. And it's kind of like what they do in the data collection class. It's a completely different topic, but it's kind of like that interaction, that back and forth. I'm going to share this knowledge with you, and you're going to ask me some pointed questions, and then I'm going to answer those questions, and I'm going to help you know everything you need to know about these other 4 research methods. And so we found that this absolutely helps them embrace the ideas, the big ideas, with every different research method, because we tell them, we try to make it authentic as well, and say, when you come up with your own proposal, you're going to have to pick the research method that would behoove that situation. It would be the best research method for that particular problem of practice, that particular audience, those particular participants, whatever. And so you're going to need to embrace all the different aspects of this particular research method that would fit. So the interaction is very pointed. It's part of the rubric that there has to be some back and forth. Sometimes when I do these kinds of situations, I don't just since there's not a particular requirement for a question, like Dr. Livengood just said, I give them prompts. You might look at asking them something like this or something like that. So giving them some prompts to guide their conversations and to guide that interaction, even if they take that and they run with it, that's better than just saying, I don't know what to say, so I think you did a great job. It helps them avoid that kind of generic answer. But the thing that I love most about this is yeah, you see one, you do one, and you teach one. I love it. I love this piece too, because the content interaction, the student to content, is on such a deeper level. It's going to help them embrace all the different aspects, because it's not something that I'm telling them they have to learn everything they need to know in a short amount of time. I'm saying, please know that you are creating a presentation for your peers, and they're going to need to understand all the big ideas. And so when they're creating their own presentation, they are creating that with their peers in mind. They're not creating it for me. That makes it a more authentic audience. I'm creating this so that my peers can know everything they need to know about action research or about XYZ. So it's giving them all kinds of authentic purposes and connection points to help them embrace all levels. So they're not necessarily having that teaching presence or that teaching interaction with me, but it hits both of those others of the COI framework.
And I love all these assignments they've already talked about. They took them. So I'm talking about one that kind of combines all that. So what I put in this is from an assignment, and I say PMP because it's easier to say. The course is psychopathology and psychopharmacology. So we're taking the mental health disorders, and we're talking about not only the disorders inside and out, but we're also talking about the medication that could possibly go alongside those disorders. So y'all, just the name of the course can be intimidating, right? So then in this course, at this time, I have them go through all the different psychotropic medications. We didn't have enough room to put all the assignment instructions. I didn't have room for all that. So I broke down some of the rubric criteria in here. But what they do is I have a Google form set up in there. They go in and they pick which medication they would like to study. And they have to study this as if they have to get deep in it, right? And it was much easier for them to, just like that, it's kind of like a piece of the jigsaw. It's like, I have to know this one well, and I have to be able to present it to help other people understand it. So that is the purpose of this first step in this assignment. So what they do is they go in that Google form, they pick the psychotropic medication they're going to study. And then from there, they have very specific criteria laid out for what has to be. They have to create a presentation talking through that medication. They have to talk through it's the mechanism of action for it, which we're talking, they have to get into a little bit of chemistry, and that's mind-blowing to them, but we're able to break it down so they have to understand and study what they're trying to explain. So you got to love, they have to throw out some of the big words, but it pushes the boundary a little bit. It shows that they are capable of big words and big things, right? And talking to their peers using that language. And so in that video, it's very specific how the presentation they create. I also have them address coping strategies that can go along with this medication so that they're pairing those together for future clients. And then I have them walk through one of those coping strategies that they recommend. So after that, everybody shares. Everybody's picked one. Everyone has picked a different drug medication. Everyone picked something different. So you get to see what the titles are, and you're like, I want to learn more about Vyvanse. I want to learn more about Prozac. I want to learn more about gabapentin, which is, so these are some that they're all listed. So they go through and they watch that person's video that has walked through every step that they had to do for theirs. They watch that video, and then from there, they have very specific laid out instructions of how they are to reply, what questions they have. And so it takes like video, but it also has a written discussion as well. So that's what I'm saying. It's kind of a combination of the two. What I did in this rubric though, is when I set up a rubric, typically these columns that I have right here are actually in one column going down. And then I have like a level 4, 3, 2, and then 1, and unobserved. And each level for each piece of this criteria is broken down into what I expect at that. So I'm going to give an example. So for time frame, I'm very specific in that time frame. Their video, if I say it has to be a minimum of 5 minutes, then that's level 4 is that's what I want, 5 minutes. Usually I put a max because if not, we'll go 20 minutes go. So we put a max because no one can keep their attention for that long, especially when you're throwing out all these big terms. So, and then they have a minimum and a maximum. If they exceed or under, that's a level 3. And it has it broken down to almost 15-second increments of if they hit that target or they didn't. But that's one of the examples of how specific I get in that rubric. So they know if my time frame isn't here, then I know that I'm going to get a level 3 or however that is. You'll see on my rubric, I'm very heavy on the content for this specific assignment, 45% of the content, mainly because they're teaching their peers. Just like what she was talking about with research methods, they should kind of have a really good idea of the mechanism of how this drug works in your body. What's it doing to me if I take it, and how to work coping skills with it. So that content is heavy, but they're taking care of each other and presenting this information. So I want it to come across well. And then I'm going to jump all the way over to response to peers. Like I said, this is just kind of my general overview, but like in response to peers, I'm very specific. I will put in there addressed whichever, and I can't remember my specific questions in that assignment of what I expect them to ask, what I want them to dig into, and that rubric breaks it down very specific of each level of what that response and engagement would be. So like I said, that's one of my, it's a hard, what I love about this assignment is, like I said, it's pushing them to do things that they didn't think they could do. And in doing that, they're celebrating together. And so many of them are like, you explained that so well. I never thought I'd understand what that even meant. And now I do. So it's a different kind of engagement that brings everybody together because they all did a hard thing and they all survived and they all learned from it. So that's one of my favorites.
She said, love the peer evaluation. Yep.
Yes, yes, yes.
I'm curious how peer feedback would align with the COA.
We're actually, we're going to talk about that a little bit, I think, in the next.
Yeah, Haley, we're going to touch on that.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now, we're going to touch on that. You want me to talk?
Go ahead.
Okay. So these are some examples of what we do, but we try to embed these kinds of certain specific aspects into every assignment to draw on that COIF framework to engage the students. So you asked about feedback, so I'll go ahead and address this. Feedback in one mode, just instructor feedback that's written into, let's say, Blackboard or Turnitin or whichever way we normally do it, is one singular mode that we have found they get kind of bored with. And it doesn't do, I mean, they need it. And I would say some of them read it, some of them don't. But what I have found is when we vary the mode of feedback, then we see an improvement in engagement in the assignment and the course in general, all those kinds of things. And so I think the way that it approaches the COI framework, like you were asking, is that cognitive presence, because they are interacting with the content a little bit more. But if I am to give feedback for an assignment and it's written, and then the next time I give feedback that's verbal, and audio feedback, recording or something like that, or video feedback, that is enhancing the instructor to student interaction and therefore the engagement. But I think it also draws on their interest and engagement and motivation in the course. So I think that's where peer feedback feeds into that. It's a different kind of feedback, and it is a different kind of connection with the content that helps improve that cognitive level. So I also wanted to touch on a couple of other things. How we make these things interactive is a variety. So if we have, we independently chose these assignments to share with you, and it's kind of funny that we chose those very similar ones. But when we are having students do things, I generally try to vary the format. And it goes against the grain of what I love to do, but I like to give them choice too. I don't necessarily like that when I'm trying to score 50 assignments because it's kind of all over the board. But if we give them choice, I have found these last 2 weeks in a particular course that I'm teaching, it was already embedded in this course that somebody else wrote, so I left it there. It's not something I normally would have done, but it allowed them to either write a report style version of something or create a presentation. And it was so interesting that how people chose to do one or the other, where I think I just assume they don't like to write as much, because I hear so much complaining about writing essays and writing so much. And just a little background, my program, they have to take 2 tests to be certified as a principal. And those tests are very writing heavy. They're laden with a lot of writing assignments. And so there's a lot of writing embedded in my courses to prepare them for those tasks. And so I always get the gist that they don't really love to write. But when I give them a choice of being able to do some other kind of presentation, they bite and they write a paper again. And so giving them those kinds of choices is going to enhance engagement. And if I'm letting them create however they feel most comfortable and interact with that content, that is going to enhance engagement. That's going to motivate them to want to get that assignment done, to want to dig into the content as much as possible, because they're not having to do something that they're being forced to do. They're doing something that they enjoy doing, writing a paper or doing a presentation and those kinds of things. So I think choice and a variety of platforms, a variety of products and outputs is important for engagement. You guys want to?
Yeah, well, one of the funny things you're asking about feedback, we actually have a presentation on feedback as well. Not today, but we do. We've talked about the different formats of feedback and the responses we've seen from the different formats. I'm going to talk on literature review first. Well, no, I'm going to go reflection. Sorry, I'm going to jump. I'm like, one of the things that I had an assignment in a course was they had to go to a group. They had to, for group counseling, they had to experience what it was like to be in an open group and tell me all about the different dynamics, interaction. They had to tell me all of it, all the pieces that we learned about a group. They had to tell me based on their experience. Prior, I would have them write a paper, and not that it was bad, but sometimes I couldn't tell based on their words if they'd truly been or not, because I wasn't hearing the specifics of someone that was been there and done that. I was hearing the formality of it, but I wanted to be like, did you really, So what we tried is we changed that written paper into a video. And in that video, they still have to cover everything. So I still use the same rubric, except for I add time and I add peer responses. But in that video, they still had to cover the same things they covered in that paper. So we're still meeting the objectives of that overall assignment, right? But in that, what I loved is because they were speaking, they ended up giving me more detail about their experience than they would have put in the paper. Like I was able to hear about the girl in the red shirt that said this, whereas that wouldn't have been in the paper. And so that made me realize, okay, they really were there. They were there, they experienced it, and that made the connection to the content. Plus, then they would share with their peers, and their peers would talk about their different experiences at different groups. Because as y'all know, every group you go to is different and you never know what you're going to get, right? So they all got to learn collaboratively through their different experiences. One other thing we do in a course that it's kind of a low stakes, but it has increased our engagement a lot. We call it a pause and ponder. It's actually informal. Which is not normal in any kind of graduate level course to do an informal, let's just pause for a second, throw out all of our thoughts. And so it's very informal, it's very low stakes, but it creates a connection in the class with students and the engagement with each other, because it's a me too. Oh my goodness, me too. I feel the same. And so they were able to connect and engage. And from that point on, that built a different kind of collaborative culture within that course where they just carried and took care of each other. We also did peer evaluations where we threw in a peer eval before it came to me. So they got to read each other's, and I didn't set as specific of a format. So they got to see how other people's perspective of the instructions came out on paper, which I actually love. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I never would have thought of doing it that way. And they have very specific questions they have to answer to that peer and provide back, plus address and give certain feedback. But that has also been another way that has created that collaborative culture within the course. And it's cool to watch them just feel like come together as an academic family. So it's been really cool.
And some of the things that she mentioned on those strategies, that's why we have these three questions here. Because like she said, literature review, that's a common assignment in graduate courses. Article review, common assignment in graduate courses. Reflection, common assignment. And so, going back to how can we make these more engaging, some of those strategies that she talked about, you could do with any of these, like the literature review, peer review, giving them guiding questions to ask about. Here's the literature review that your peer classmate wrote. Here's some guiding questions to help you read this and give feedback, so it's going to go back to the student. And the same thing, you can kind of do that same thing with an article review. But doing a collaborative review where they're reviewing multiple ones, but those are the kind of things we try to look for, opportunities to take what might have been a traditional assignment and add that engagement piece.
Okay, so these were some of our specific points that, because we talked about lessons learned. One of the first one I put is outlining the specific interactive instructions given for presentations, discussions, any of that, being very specific in what you expect. And I believe taking out the questions, that also supports our feedback and our reasoning behind giving, them earning the score that they did. But as we've learned as we go, we all are like, oh, okay, I should have asked that a little more specific, because that was not the product I was expecting. So that was one of my lessons learned, is getting very specific on what kind of interaction I want, how I want it, and what I want them to do to get to that point.
So the other one, determine required components. That is where I have to go back and say, okay, what are my objectives? Especially an example would be a multimedia presentation or a presentation. Am I going to require voice? Am I going to require sound at all? Am I going to require images? Am I going to give guidance to exactly what kind of images? Am I going to require, if it's a video, am I going to require just voiceover, or am I going to require that I be able to see them? So those are kind of those things that you need to make a decision up front when you're writing those instructions, is exactly what do I want to require, and what are those things that aren't as important for this particular assignment, this particular objective.
And then the last one that I wanted to touch on, when you have those peer interactions where they are reviewing each other's material, like Kristen just said, when they when they get to see something that somebody else did and they go, oh, I didn't even think about interpreting the directions that way. I love that kind of thing. And if there's an isolation embedded in the course and they never get to see anybody else's product, they don't get that kind of idea stimulated. So we all in all of our classes have a discussion board that's just ongoing, where they can ask questions of assignments, of particulars that are related to the course, the programs, the whatever. So we call it a class cafe. And we encourage them 100% of the time, all the time, take that to class cafe, take that to class cafe, so that, and we always say it, I think, in every course, so that everyone can benefit from this conversation. But I see that has been the biggest bonus when they are in there communicating with each other. Then when we say, okay, you have choice, you can do this however you want to do it, and there's flexibility with this assignment. They have had that interaction with their peers to know there's a wide world out there that I didn't know existed. I would have only done it like this. One of the assignments that it also helps when we embed certain things to teach them platforms, for instance, Microsoft Sway. To me, it is such a minimally used program. And every time one of my classes uses Sway, they say, oh my gosh, I love this. I love the way it looks. I love that it's accessible on every platform in a different way. And so embedding certain kinds of components, like Dr. Livengood said a minute ago, and then in specific instructions like Dr. Lyons said, then that helps them know what they want to do when they are given choice and they are given flexibility to do things. And that just enhances that engagement as well. So that kind of student to teacher interaction, student to student interaction is going to help them with this last point. I think that's it. Yes. Now we're ready for some questions.
Questions, comments?
your lessons learned, there's always that.
Yeah. Any ideas you want to share? Thank you, Gloria.
Or did any of these assignments or strategies spark an idea that you could think of using for your own courses? Or in a course that you're familiar with?
Hi, this is Ken Lightfoot. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I like the idea that early on in your talk, you mentioned that in a sense, you're making student groups project managers, or people contributing to a project. The instructor could act as a project manager, and I really like that. And it made me think about the unfairness when you have a group of people and you have one or two or just one that doesn't contribute. And you mentioned the case where it drug down the overall points that your son got. Could that not be overcome if you had a way to grade individual contributions to a task? And so, a student who really did put the time and effort would be given that score, and then the group has to suffer for the lower score. But it teaches them to know that, if you are the person who lags, you're going to drag everybody down. But it also, I think, rewards those people who are prepared to put the time in and not penalize them because of one or two others, because I think that can create a very, very frustrating and alienating, feeling for a student, especially those. This has been a particular interest of mine, studying in isolation. It's one of the biggest causes, I think, for at least where I am at Thomas Edison State University, where people drop out.
Yes. And speaking on, because we do have some online groups, like I said, we're asynchronous, but we do have online groups that we set up to complete projects. And we do take that into account because all of us have been in that group where we had to pick up the slack for somebody, right? So one of the ways that we've gone about trying to balance that is we do have every student complete it's not anonymous, sorry, but no one can see what they're saying, and they rate each group member for how, and part of it, so we have the assignment where they get the score, but then we also in the grade column, they have an opportunity to get graded by their peers, and that goes in for their grade. So usually they'll go out, you averages that. So like if it's a group of 4, you're going to get 3 peer reviews given back, and they have, from 0 to 5 points that they can give you. We average that out, and that's the score they get for their peer feedback part of the assignment. So that in a way kind of holds it accountable. I've also had those that they'll reach out, they get their group assignments way early, and they'll say, this person is like ghosting us. We don't know where they are, what's going on. So in that opportunity, then I say, email again. If you don't hear back, email me tomorrow. I will reach out to the student. I will start that. So then I decide if that person stays in the group or they don't. And if they do not stay in the group, then I still have them complete the assignment on their own, but they're out of the group work opportunity. So I've had that happen. I've also, when a project is submitted, if they scored that this person, they didn't tell me that they weren't in the group, right? I didn't know until I see the peer reviews come through. If I see that happen and they have all scored and said this person did not participate, then I go back and I have that student individually complete the assignment again on their own, because they carried them, but that's not correct. I don't feel like that is right. And so but once again, overall, I want that student to learn this content as well, and they missed out on that content. So therefore I need them to learn it. So that's some of the ways we've gone about our group. And I saw some nods. I'm pretty sure it looks like we're not the only ones that have done something like that, just to try to keep the fairness and make groups as functional as possible.
And I think the key is also to not, every assignment can't be a group assignment. You've got to give them the ability to do things on their own, especially because there's some people who have been burned in those kind of situations and they don't ever want to be a part of a group again. Yeah. But like I said earlier, that's such an integral part of our students' roles after they leave our program, that interpersonal connection. And so they're going to have to work with people they don't like. So one of the things that I've done in a class, you just made me think of this, is qualitative feedback for the peer comments. So you can't just score them on a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for
Yes.
this particular situation. I need qualitative feedback. So if you're going to tell me that they get a 1, you're going to need to tell me why. And a lot of times they can offer that kind of commentary, but it's funny because sometimes it catches people where they can't, and they say, well, I just didn't like the way they did it. Well, but that's part of being in a team. And so what kind of feedback did you give them to tell them that how they were doing this didn't contribute enough or well, or in a way that you could wrap your head around, so just helping them learn how to have those kinds of relationships. I think that's part of our responsibility as well. So I never liked doing, when I taught secondary English, I never liked doing group projects because I was always going to get a lot of flack from everybody, but it always won out because it's such an integral part of their learning experience. So I think you're right that we have to do it, and we got to figure out ways to do it. So yeah.
Thank you, though. That was an awesome.
Thank
point.
you.
Yeah. Any other questions? So grateful for all of you guys to come.
Thank you for taking the time to join us.
I like your background, Yvonne. Thank you. Oh, Teresa, thank you. I thought it was Amy.
Haley's done.
Yeah. That's all.
I'll just make one other comment, and it's about discussion questions. Our model is very different here. We don't have instructors. We hire, we call them mentors. And so the courses aren't theirs. The Thomas Edison State University courses, that allows us to introduce, hopefully, an element of quality control that's more even than if we just had relied on a lot of different instructors. But I think the drawback on that is it might makes a lot of people feel, well, this isn't really my course. So I found that one of the things over the years, I think, we try to get collaboration through discussion questions. They're very standard features in our courses. But the art of writing a question, or even just making a statement, that it's really hard. And so I think it's one of our Achilles heels is that, again, to generate that conversation, writing a discussion question is a real art. In my experience, because, well, we don't build the courses internally. We hire subject matter experts, and that's part of their brief. But to be quite honest, over 28 years of doing this, there are very, very few that I feel that have, they're really into it. They really want to generate a discussion. The question is really more like a treasure hunt, so that we instructional designers have to go in and absolutely, change them quite often. But I was wondering what the experience was, in your world like that.
Discussion, well, we found that there was at a point, we were overusing basic discussion boards. And so that's where we started really digging into these different assignments, because, when we first went online many years ago, that was the go-to for getting student-to-student interaction online. And now there are so many other tools and so many tweaks and kind of changes that we've been able to implement with some of the ideas we've talked about here, that you're very rarely going to find the basic discussion post in our courses. In fact, overall programs, you might find 1 or 2. And I'm talking a whole degree worth of courses. We have found different ways of engaging, oftentimes not even our introductions are on discussion boards or a basic discussion board in our courses, because we realized that if we did the same thing over and over again, they were no longer engaging. They were bored with it.
It became robots. And if you, just like y'all in Blackboard, with the students that are engaged in the conversation, because when you go to score them, you open it up and you'll see the ones that use the exact same, it's like a copy and paste, and for your 3 peer responses. And I'm like, nope. But they will, right? And so that's something that I'm like, how do I get them out of this? And so we changing, if you can respond to 1 peer with this type, 1 peer with this type, 1 with this, and it makes them have to study it a little more.
Yeah, to differentiate between, I agree with this comment and to give some own personal experience, or I disagree with this one, or to make an argument. But that's one of the reasons why I started embedding prompts for responses. So that if it says, and it's also embedded in the rubric to say your peer responses have to either do this, do this, do this, and it changes for the levels on the rubric, but a level 4 is going to say that you presented, it's not arguing, but you presented an argument against what they were saying, or you disagreed, or you thought of a different way to approach it. So things like that. But were you talking about trying to frame discussion board questions to answer and to get to how to build those, or were you talking about responses?
No, well, I think our model relies too much on them. And I take your point about the fact that back in the day when it was the way to go, we've never really changed that. But having that model, we use rubrics. We have very specific rubrics as well. So I think that does help. But where we do have, say that is applicable to have a discussion question, I've in my experience, I found a lot of subject matter experts they're not very adept at framing a question that will generate a discussion.
Right.
So that's one of the jobs that we as instructional designers have had to do over the years, actually go in and suggest to them either an entirely new question to cover the material or the task that they want, or tweak it so that, and it's amazing, just even sometimes just adding a clause or something like that will make it more discussable.
Yes.
But I do take your point. I mean, I'd like to see us get away from just this gratuitous, we have modules and every module has at least one discussion question. It's like, yeah, but if it's not a good question, what's the point? What does it serve? So I really like the models that you presented. I think they're much better, and it makes me think more of like a project management approach where people have different roles, but they have to discuss what those roles are and how it all
Right.
comes together as a collaborative effort.
Yes.
Yeah. Haley, she asked, are we working with a master course design model?
I don't know if you were asking us or him. That's all.
Oh, I was asking the presenters, yes.
Okay.
You
Okay. Go ahead, Kim.
Well, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by a master course design model. Is there a specific?
What I mean is where the course design is the same in each
Okay,
course.
so
Like
we do use a course template in that,
which kind of aligns with what Ken was talking in his as well.
Yes, so but it's very much access points. So like the top of ours is going to be those introduction, how to connect with your professor, announcements, rubric, not rubric, sorry,
the
syllabus,
navigation,
the navigation piece. Then at the bottom of the menu is going to be more resources that you may need to complete the course, those kind of things. And then in the middle, we have our content modules. And that's where, yes, they can find all of our courses. You're going to be able to find the content in those modules right there in the middle. And we have it structured in general where that when you click on one tab, when you open, we're in Blackboard, when you open that one tab, that one page, somehow everything you need to complete the task, the objective of that one is in there. What it looks like can vary. Because we used to have it very cookie cutter, and that goes back to that idea that I talked about with discussion boards. If we did discussion boards the same, when we were doing discussion boards the same, we found it unengaging. So if we try to do those with a content, where the content was presented within the module the same way in every course, it became unengaging. So you're going to find in the different courses within that module piece, some of the modules may take 2 weeks, some of the modules may take 1 week, some of the assignments in there are going to be different, some of them are going to use folders, some of them are going to use links. It's going to be very dependent upon the objective of that, for that module, of that assignment, for that content, for those students.
Okay.
Yeah, but we do kind of have a template where that way, if we have 3 sections of a course that's going to run, we at least know we're all presenting the content in the same format. but then each instructor can make it more specific to them. And then depending on the course content, how it's delivered, like she said, depends on how we set up that module delivery. But for the most part, we deliver like that.
Yeah, and so that then, so we have like a departmental template that's that structure. And then for each course, we have a template so that if we're teaching 7 sections of individual counseling, all of those courses look the same, have the same content, have the same assignments, have the same rubrics. And then from there, if a faculty member needs to move dates around, if that piece can change. But you also have to realize our courses are often team built. So it's not like one person built this course and it's handed off with the expectation of no one to ever touch it. It's a very collaborative process in our department.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
And Haley, you and Yvonne have both made comments about feedback. So we have great talks about feedback. So we will share that at some point.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I put my
Sounds like
information
that's
in
our
the
next
chat.
ADEIL submission.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you, presenters, so much. And thank you to our attendees. And after the webinar, you will receive an email. Please be sure to complete the webinar evaluation for us. And of course, if you are not an ADEIL member, we welcome you to join ADEIL. And again, thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
All right, thank you.